My fiancé laughed at my disabled mother in front of 300 wedding guests. I took off my ring, grabbed the mic, and exposed every secret he ever told me. Welcome back, family. If you haven't already, subscribe and say hi in the comments. We'd love to know where you're watching from. With that, let's continue today's story. The champagne glasses clinked around me while my world shattered into 1,000 pieces. 300 guests filled the ballroom, their laughter echoing off crystal chandeliers that cost more than my mother's entire year of medical care. I stood frozen in my white Vera Wang gown, the one Louis insisted I buy despite the $12,000 price tag, watching my fiancé mock the woman who raised me alone after my father walked out. She's drooling again, Louis whispered to his groomsmen loud enough for the front tables to hear. His finger pointed directly at my mother, slumped slightly in her wheelchair, her left side still partially paralyzed from the stroke she'd suffered 8 months ago. Should have left her at the nursing home. This is embarrassing. The groomsmen erupted in laughter. Chad, Louis's college buddy, actually slapped his knee. My hands trembled around my bouquet of white roses. I'd spent 17 hours this week helping Mom practice using her walker, hoping she'd feel confident enough to stand during our ceremony. She'd been so excited, tears streaming down her face when I told her she'd be walking me down the aisle. "Louis," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the jazz band. He didn't hear me. Or maybe he just didn't care. He was too busy entertaining his crowd, mimicking my mother's slurred speech, contorting his face in a cruel impression that made his fraternity brothers howl. That's when something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped. Like a steel cable pulled too tight for too long. I thought about every excuse I'd made for him, every red flag I'd painted green, every time I'd chosen his comfort over my own dignity. I'd been reasonable, patient, understanding. Not anymore. 6 months earlier, Louis Pemberton had been everything I thought I wanted. We'd met at a corporate charity gala where I was catering desserts for my struggling bakery business, and he was schmoozing potential investors for his father's real estate empire. He'd approached my table, loosened his Armani tie, and said, "These chocolate truffles are better than anything at Per Se. You make these yourself." I'd been charmed. Completely stupidly charmed. He was handsome, 6'2" with perfect teeth and that confidence wealthy people wear like expensive cologne. Within 3 weeks we were inseparable. Within 3 months he proposed with his grandmother's 5-carat diamond ring at a rooftop restaurant where the waiting list was 6 months long. "You're different from the women I usually date," he told me that night, spinning the ring on my finger. "You're real. Authentic. My mother's going to love you." His mother, Patricia Pemberton, did not love me. She tolerated me the way someone tolerates a persistent mosquito, with barely concealed irritation and occasional swatting attempts. At our first dinner, she'd looked at my off-the-rack dress and asked, "Is that vintage?" It wasn't. It was just old. But I'd ignored the warning signs. The way Louis's voice changed when he talked to service staff. How he'd asked me to stop mentioning my mother's condition to his friends because it brings down the mood. The time he'd convinced me to skip Mom's birthday because his father had Nick's tickets. I justified everything. He's under stress. He's not used to illness. He'll change after the wedding. Now, standing in that ballroom watching him mock the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to send me to culinary school, I finally saw him clearly. The monster had always been there. I'd just been too desperate for the fairy tale to notice. My mother, Diana Washington, wasn't always disabled. Growing up, she'd been a force of nature, working as a hospital administrator during the day, attending my school events at night, somehow always finding time to braid my hair and quiz me on spelling words. After Dad left when I was 7, she'd become both parents, never once complaining about the double shift life had handed her. The stroke happened on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I was supposed to meet Louis's parents for brunch, and I'd been anxiously choosing an outfit when the hospital called. She'd collapsed at work, right there in the middle of a staff meeting. By the time I arrived, half her face had gone slack, her left arm useless at her side. "Baby girl," she'd slurred through paralyzed lips, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. The wedding. I'll ruin your wedding." "Mama, don't," I'd whispered, holding her trembling right hand. "You could never ruin anything. You're going to walk me down that aisle. I promise." Louis had been supportive at first. He'd visited the hospital twice, brought flowers once, and told his friends his fiancée was dealing with a family emergency. But as weeks turned to months, as Mom's recovery crawled forward with agonizing slowness, his patience evaporated like morning dew. "Can't you hire someone?" he'd asked last month, watching me cancel our dinner reservation to drive Mom to physical therapy. "My mother knows an excellent facility. Very discreet." "She's my mother, Louis. Not a problem to be hidden away. I'm just saying we need to think about our image. My father's business associates will be at the wedding. We can't have..." "Can't have what? A disabled woman present? A mother who loves her daughter." He'd sighed, that exasperated sound I'd heard increasingly often. "You're being emotional. I'm trying to help." Now, watching Louis perform his cruel comedy routine, I saw my mother's face. She'd noticed. Of course she'd noticed. Her right hand gripped the wheelchair's armrest, knuckles pale against her brown skin. Tears pooled in her eyes, but she held her head high, dignity intact despite the humiliation. Our eyes met across the crowded ballroom. In that moment, I saw everything she'd sacrificed for me. Every double shift. Every missed date because she'd been at my soccer games. Every time she'd gone without so I could have. The stroke hadn't diminished her. It had just revealed what had always been there. Unbreakable strength. She shook her head slightly, a small gesture that meant "don't make a scene, baby. I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. And I was done pretending. "Hey, at least she won't remember this tomorrow," Louis continued, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "Probably doesn't even know where she is. Right, Diana?" He waved at my mother like she was a child. That was it. The final straw that broke the camel's back, the match that lit the dynamite, the moment everything I'd been swallowing for 6 months came flooding back up. I set down my bouquet carefully on the nearest table. My hands had stopped shaking. In fact, I felt eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes right before a hurricane makes landfall. I walked toward the stage where the band had just finished a jazz rendition of "At Last." The lead singer, a woman named Jasmine who'd been incredibly kind during our rehearsal, noticed me approaching. Her eyes widened slightly. She'd heard Louis too. Everyone had heard Louis. "Can I borrow that?" I asked, gesturing to her microphone. She handed it to me without hesitation. "Girl, do what you need to do." The music stopped. 300 faces turned toward me. Louis finally noticed, his laughter dying in his throat. I smiled. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice steady as it echoed through the ballroom. "I'm sure you're all wondering why the bride is interrupting the reception before we've even had the ceremony." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Louis stood frozen, his champagne glass halfway to his lips. "Well, I've just realized something important. Something I should have realized 6 months ago, or maybe 6 minutes into meeting this man." I twisted my engagement ring, feeling its weight for the last time. "Louis, you asked me to marry you because I was different. Authentic, you said. What you really meant was that I was grateful. Grateful enough to overlook your cruelty. Grateful enough to ignore how you treat people you think are beneath you. Sweetheart, what are you doing?" Louis's voice cracked slightly. His face had gone pale. "You're upset. Let's talk about this privately." "Privately?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Like how you privately told your groomsmen that my mother's stroke was unfortunate timing? Or how you privately suggested I convince her not to attend today because she'd lower the aesthetic of your perfect wedding photos?" Gasps erupted from the crowd. I saw Louis's mother, Patricia, clutch her pearl necklace. "Good. Let her clutch those pearls tight. I need to tell you all something about the man I almost married," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "Louis Pemberton presents himself as successful, self-made, generous. But here's what he told me in private when he thought I was too in love to care." Louis lurched forward. "Stop. Right now. You're making a huge mistake." "The only mistake," I interrupted, sliding the ring off my finger and holding it up to the light, "was saying yes to you." The diamond caught the chandelier light, sending tiny rainbows across the horrified faces below. "Let's start with the business empire," I said, pacing the stage like a prosecutor presenting evidence. My heart pounded, but adrenaline pushed me forward. "Louis loves to tell people he's a real estate developer. He's listed as Vice President of Pemberton Properties on LinkedIn. Sounds impressive, right?" I paused for effect. His father gave him that title for his 30th birthday. Like a participation trophy. Louis has never actually closed a deal. In fact, 3 months ago he lost a $17 million contract because he missed the deadline while hungover in Atlantic City. Lewis's father, Richard Pemberton, stood abruptly. His face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "That's confidential business information," Lewis sputtered. "You signed an NDA." "I signed an NDA about your father's business. Not about your lies." I turned to address the crowd directly. "Here's another fun fact. Lewis told everyone we met at a charity gala. What he didn't mention is that he was there because his father forced him to attend after Lewis was caught embezzling $40,000 from the family foundation." The ballroom erupted. People were standing now, phones out, recording everything. I didn't care. Let them record. Let the whole world see. "The money was repaid quietly," I continued. "No charges filed. Because that's what happens when you're rich and white and your father plays golf with the district attorney. But Lewis told me about it one night when he was drunk, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate the books. He said, 'The best part is, no one even noticed until my cousin Lewis turned whistleblower.'" I scanned the crowd until I found him, Lewis's cousin Jake, standing near the back, his expression unreadable. Jake tried to do the right thing. And Lewis? He turned the family against Jake, made him look jealous and vindictive. Got him uninvited from family events. Jake's wife grabbed his hand, tears in her eyes. "Should I continue?" I asked Lewis directly. His jaw clenched. "You'll regret this." "I already regret 6 months," I shot back. "What's 5 more minutes?" "Let's talk about this loving family," I said, gesturing toward the Pemberton table. Patricia had sat back down, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. Richard looked like he might have a stroke himself. Good. Let him feel a fraction of what my mother felt. "Patricia, you told me at our engagement party that you hoped I'd grow into the role of a Pemberton wife. When I asked what that meant, you said, learning when to be seen and not heard." Patricia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I'd never seen her speechless before. It was glorious. "You also said my mother's condition was a blessing in disguise, because it meant she wouldn't be too involved in wedding planning. You suggested I consider a small, private ceremony so we could avoid the optics issue of having a disabled woman in the family photos." Several guests gasped. I saw my cousin Shanice recording on her phone and I gave her a small nod. "Posted everywhere, girl." "Richard, you're no better," I continued, turning to Lewis's father. "You told your son that marrying me was slumming it, but good for his public image. Shows you're not elitist," you said. "Like I'm a charity case. A diversity hire for the family." "That's enough," Richard roared, standing again. "This is slander. I'll have my lawyers." "Record me," I interrupted, holding up my phone. "I've been recording our conversations for months. Every family dinner. Every private meeting. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state, Richard. I know because I checked." That shut him up fast. His lawyer instincts kicked in and he sat down slowly, calculating the damage. "Lewis's sister, Vanessa," I said, spotting her near the gift table, "told me I should be grateful Lewis was willing to overlook my lower-class background. She said I should lose 15 pounds before the wedding because Pemberton wives maintain certain standards." Vanessa's face flushed crimson. Her husband, a quiet man named David, looked shocked. Apparently, she hadn't shared her mean girl tendencies with him. I was just getting started. "But the worst part," I said, my voice dropping lower, forcing everyone to lean in and listen, "wasn't how you treated me. I could have survived that. I've dealt with casual racism and classism my whole life. What I can't survive, what I won't survive, is how you treated my mother." The ballroom had gone completely silent. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, frozen in the doorway with trays of untouched food. "Last month, Lewis told me we should transition my mother into a long-term care facility. I asked why, since she's recovering well and can live independently with minimal help. He said, and I quote, 'Babe, she's dead weight. We can't build our life dragging around someone who can't even speak properly. Think about when we have kids. Do you want them seeing their grandmother drool?'" I heard my mother sob from her wheelchair. My Aunt Regina, sitting beside her, wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I told him that was cruel," I continued, tears now streaming down my face, but my voice remained steady. "He said I was being dramatic, that I needed to prioritize our future over past obligations. He called my mother, the woman who sacrificed everything to raise me alone, an obligation. Louis tried to approach the stage, but his best man, Chad, grabbed his arm. Even Chad looked uncomfortable now, like he was finally realizing he'd been laughing along with a monster. 2 weeks ago, Louis took out a life insurance policy on my mother, I said, dropping the bomb I'd been saving. I found the paperwork in his office. $2 million with him listed as the beneficiary. When I confronted him, he said it was standard procedure for dependents. Except my mother isn't his dependent. He's mine. And I never signed any authorization. The crowd exploded. People were shouting now. Someone yelled, "Call the police." Richard Pemberton looked like he might actually pass out. "It gets better," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "The policy was purchased through a company his father owns. Which means this entire family knew." "Is this true?" A voice rang out from the crowd. I recognized it immediately. Judge Patricia Montgomery, one of Louis's father's old friends and someone Richard had invited to impress. She stood, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her expression thunderous. "Richard, did you authorize a fraudulent insurance policy?" Richard stammered. "It's not. The circumstances were, we were planning." "Planning what?" Judge Montgomery demanded. "Insurance fraud? Because that's what this sounds like." He turned to me. "Do you have proof, young lady?" I pulled out my phone, pulled up the photos I'd taken of the documents and held it up. "I have photos of the policy, the application with forged signatures, and text messages between Louis and his father discussing the investment opportunity. Would you like me to send them to you, Your Honor?" "Please do," she said coldly, providing her email address. Within seconds, I'd forwarded everything. Judge Montgomery's face grew darker as she scrolled through her phone. "This is criminal. Richard, Louis, I suggest you both retain legal counsel immediately." My mother's doctor, Dr. Yvonne Chin, who'd been invited because she'd become a friend during Mom's recovery, stood up next. "I need to report something. Mr. Pemberton contacted me 4 weeks ago, asking about Diana's prognosis. Specifically, he wanted to know her life expectancy and whether stress could trigger another stroke. I declined to provide information without patient consent. Now I understand why he was asking." The ballroom buzzed with shock. My cousin Shanice shouted. "He was trying to kill her. He was planning to stress her to death." "I don't know about that," Dr. Chin said carefully, ever the professional, but his questions were highly inappropriate and concerning. Louis's college friend, a guy named Antonio, spoke up suddenly. "Man, I thought you were joking. That night at the bachelor party when you said..." He stopped, looking sick. "I thought you were just drunk and talking trash." "What did he say?" I asked, mic still in hand. Antonio looked at Louis, then at me. Something like regret crossed his face. "He said once you were married and your mom passed, you'd inherit her house. Said it was in a neighborhood that's about to gentrify and would flip for $1 million easy. My mother's house. The 3-bedroom row house she'd bought 20 years ago, the one she'd scraped and saved for, the one that held every memory of my childhood. Louis had been planning to sell it. To profit from my mother's death. I felt my knees weaken, but I locked them. I wouldn't fall. Not here. Not in front of these people. There's more," I said, my voice hollow now, the adrenaline starting to fade. 3 days ago, I overheard Louis on the phone with a wedding planner. Not our wedding planner, a different one. He was planning a second ceremony. A real wedding, he called it. For 6 months from now. The crowd gasped again. They'd been gasping so much it was almost comical. Almost. "He was planning to marry Tiffany Carlisle," I said, watching Louis's face drain of color. "His ex-girlfriend from college. The one he told me he was completely over. Turns out they never broke up. They've been together this entire time. Tiffany's been living in his condo downtown. The one he said was just an investment property." A blonde woman I'd noticed earlier sitting alone near the back stood up. She wore a tight red dress and an expression of pure venom. "You knew?" she shrieked at Louis. "You told me she was a business arrangement. A marriage of convenience to access her mother's assets. So that was Tiffany. She'd been at my wedding. Louis had invited his actual girlfriend to watch him marry his Mark. A business arrangement," I repeated into the mic. "That's what I was. Not a fiancé. Not a partner. A transaction. Marry the girl with the dying mother, Get the insurance payout, sell the house, divorce me within a year, keep most of the assets and ride off into the sunset with Tiffany. That's not, I never. Louis stumbled over his words, looking between me and Tiffany, his carefully constructed world crumbling in real time. Here's the thing about being underestimated, I said, looking directly at him. People forget that you're watching. Bernie. Recording. I held up my phone again. I have 6 months of text messages, recorded phone calls, financial documents, and witnesses. I'm a witness, my mother said suddenly, her voice slurred but determined. She'd stood up from her wheelchair, gripping her walker with her good hand. Aunt Regina tried to ease her back down, but Mom shook her head stubbornly. He came to my house. Last month. When you were at work. My blood ran cold. Mama, what? He offered me money, she continued, each word a struggle but clear enough. $50,000. Said I should sign papers. Transfer my house to you. Make things easier, he said. So you wouldn't have to deal with probate when I died. The ballroom erupted again. I felt dizzy. Louis had gone to my mother's house. Had stood in her living room, looked at a disabled woman, and tried to manipulate her into signing away her home. I told him no, Mom said, tears streaming down her face but pride in her voice. Told him to get out. He said I was being selfish. That I was holding you back from your potential. He called me a burden. I dropped the microphone. The sound of it hitting the stage echoed through the speakers, a sharp crack that made everyone flinch. I walked down the stage steps, across the ballroom floor, through the parting crowd. When I reached my mother, I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her shake against me. I'm so sorry, Mama, I whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry I brought him into your life. Baby girl, she said, stroking my back with her good hand. You didn't know. But now you do. And look at you. Standing up. Speaking truth. I raised a strong woman. Behind me I heard chaos. Tiffany was screaming at Louis. Judge Montgomery was on her phone, presumably with law enforcement. Richard and Patricia were arguing viciously with each other, their perfect facade shattered. Guests were filing out, some stopping to hug me, others just eager to escape the drama. But I stayed there, holding my mother, the woman who'd never given up on me, the woman I'd almost sacrificed for a man who saw her as an obstacle to remove. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Not because of the insurance fraud, that would take time to investigate, but because Louis, drunk on champagne and rage, had taken a swing at Antonio for betraying him. He'd missed Antonio and hit a catering table instead, sending a 40-pound ice sculpture crashing to the floor. Judge Montgomery gave a statement. Dr. Chin gave a statement. I forwarded all my evidence to the officers, who looked increasingly grim as they scrolled through months of documentation. They arrested Louis on the spot for attempted assault, with promises that fraud charges would follow pending investigation. Patricia tried to approach me as they led Louis away in handcuffs. This is all a misunderstanding, she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. If you'd just been more flexible, more understanding of how families like ours operate. Families like yours? I interrupted, finally facing her directly. You mean families that value money over people? That treat human beings like assets to be managed? That think a disabled woman has no worth? I stepped closer and she actually flinched. I'm grateful I'll never be part of your family. My mother is worth 1,000 of you. She recoiled like I'd slapped her. Richard grabbed her arm, pulling her away before she could respond. They left through a side door, their exit considerably less grand than their entrance had been. The venue manager approached me hesitantly. Ma'am, about the payment. Send the bill to Richard Pemberton, I said. He wanted this wedding. He can pay for it. I'd paid my portion up front. The caterer, my dress, the flowers. Everything else was Louis's responsibility. Slowly the ballroom emptied. My family and friends gathered around Mom and me, forming a protective circle. My cousin Shanice hugged me tight. Girl, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You just became a legend. But I didn't feel legendary. I felt tired. Heartbroken. Angry at myself for wasting 6 months on a man who'd never loved me. 6 months I could have spent with my mother instead of planning a wedding to my nightmare. 3 weeks later, I sat in my mother's living room, the one Louis had tried to steal, watching her work through her physical therapy exercises. She'd improved so much in these weeks without the stress of wedding planning, without Louis's toxic presence hovering over us like a storm cloud. "You've been quiet," Mom said, pausing to catch her breath. Her speech had improved dramatically, the words coming easier now. "What's on your mind, baby?" "I've been thinking about why I stayed," I admitted. "Why I ignored all the signs. All the cruelty. The manipulation." Mom set down her resistance band and reached for my hand. "You wanted to be loved. Ain't nothing wrong with that." "But I was loved," I said, squeezing her hand. "By you. By Aunt Regina and Shanice and everyone who actually cares about me. I had love. I just thought I needed his love to be complete. Like I wasn't enough on my own." "And now?" she asked gently. "How I know I'm enough. More than enough." I looked at my mother, this woman who'd survived so much. Poverty, abandonment, illness, and had never lost her dignity or her love. Louis taught me something valuable even if he didn't mean to. He taught me that some people see kindness as weakness, humility as inferiority, love as something to exploit. The doorbell rang. I answered it to find Judge Montgomery standing on our porch, looking official in her gray suit. "May I come in?" Inside, she delivered news. Louis had been formally charged with insurance fraud, attempted fraud, and conspiracy. His father faced charges too. The DA, despite his golf games with Richard, couldn't ignore the mountain of evidence I'd provided. The trial would likely result in prison time for both men. "You did a brave thing," Judge Montgomery said, preparing to leave. "Many women would have stayed silent, taken the abuse, convinced themselves it wasn't that bad." "I almost did," I confessed. "If he hadn't gone after my mother." "But he did," she interrupted gently. "And you chose her. You chose yourself. That takes courage." After she left, Mom and I sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset through her front window. The house was small, the furniture worn, the paint peeling in corners. But it was filled with love. Real love. The kind that doesn't come with conditions or insurance policies or schemes. "I'm going back to my bakery," I announced suddenly. "Full time. No more distractions. No more trying to be someone I'm not for someone who didn't deserve me." Mom smiled, that beautiful smile that lit up her whole face despite the slight droop on one side. "That's my girl." 2 months later, my bakery, Diana's Sweets, renamed in honor of my mother, was thriving. The story had gone viral. Shanice's video had millions of views. People came from all over to support the woman who'd stood up to her rich, fraudulent fiancé. But more than that, they came because my desserts were excellent and the little shop felt like home. Louis went to prison for 4 years. His father got 6. Patricia filed for divorce and moved to Florida. Tiffany tried to sell her story to tabloids, but no one cared about the mistress. Me. I learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the best thing that could happen. I learned that my worth wasn't determined by who wanted to marry me, but by how I treated people who couldn't do anything for me. I learned that my mother's love was worth more than all of Louis's money. But I also learned something darker, something that still wakes me up at night. My mother's health never fully recovered. The stress Louis caused, the manipulation, the cruelty, it took a toll that no amount of physical therapy could fully repair. She lived 3 more years, good years filled with love and laughter and pride in watching my business grow. But on a quiet Tuesday morning, almost 3 years to the day after that wedding that never was, my mother had a second stroke. This one she didn't survive. I held her hand as she slipped away, and her last words to me were, "I'm so proud of you, baby girl. So proud you chose yourself." I buried her in her favorite purple dress, in a plot I'd purchased with money from my business. The business that existed because she'd believed in me. At the funeral, 300 people showed up. Not because of money or obligation, but because Diana Washington had touched lives simply by being kind, by being strong, by loving her daughter unconditionally. Standing at her grave, I realized the cruelest irony. Louis got what he wanted. My mother was gone and I'd inherited her house. But instead of selling it to the highest bidder, I turned it into a community center offering free resources for stroke survivors and their families. Every room holds her memory. Every person helped is a tribute to her strength. The betrayal taught me who to trust. The revenge gave me justice. But the loss? The loss taught me that time is the only currency that matters, and I'd wasted 6 months of it with a man who never deserved a single second. Some stories have happy endings. This one has a real ending. I'm stronger now, wiser, more careful with my heart. My business thrives. I help others. I honor my mother's memory every single day. But late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment above the bakery, I still cry for the time I lost. For the stress I allowed into her final years. For choosing a fake diamond over a real mother, even for just 6 months. That's the lesson. Love the people who love you. Protect them fiercely. Don't wait for a crisis to show you who matters. And never, ever let anyone convince you that cruelty is normal, that abuse is love, that you should be grateful for being treated as less than you are. My mother deserved better than the pain Lewis caused. But she got something more important. A daughter who finally understood her worth, who fought for her, who chose her when it mattered most. I just wish I'd chosen her sooner. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share your own experiences in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between love and family? How did you find the strength to stand up for what's right? Let's support each other. And remember, you are enough exactly as you are. In memory of all the mothers who sacrificed everything, and all the daughters who learned to fight back.